Thank you, Austin. Wow. Thanks for being here, and welcome to Crime Adjacent Live. Before we start, I need a favor. Listen like a profiler, because everything I'm about to tell you, every detail, it all matters for solving this case. So tonight's case begins in 1987 in Dearborn, Michigan, when a man comes home from a business trip and reports that he feels heavy. That's the exact word he used, heavy. Within hours, he's dead. By all accounts, this looks like a heart attack, a terrible, ordinary tragedy. But then, another man, and another city, another trip, more seemingly ordinary tragedies. All across America, from roughly 1987 to 1994, at least 12 men that we know of returned home from business trips reported the same strange phrase that they felt heavy and died within hours. It took the FBI nearly a decade, one accidental conversation, in the tiniest overlooked detail to realize these were not ordinary, disconnected, tragic events. These were homicides. And there was a killer somewhere in America hunting business travelers one by one. Okay, profilers, let's dive straight into this case, because you won't believe what happens next. Live from Austin, I'm Chase Patrick, and this is Crime Adjacent. So this story all begins with Barnie Jones, age 53, in 1987 in Dearborn, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. And Barnie is rising through the ranks of the company and is a middle manager and head of the Xerox sales team. So he traveled a lot, training everyone under him how to sell big business on printers and copy machines. Barnie was known around the office as a nice guy, kind, charming, helpful, but also a little bit of a weirdo. Maybe that's not the right word. You'd probably call him a fitness influencer nowadays or a CrossFit junkie. But back in the 80s, he would have been called a health nut. Salads, juices, cleanses, Tab, Yoplait, Tofu, Body by Jake, Bowflex. He had or used every new piece of equipment or TV advertised fitness class. And he loved to talk about it. His wife, Alice, remembers teasing him on a weekly basis. She used to tell him, "Honey, you're a salesman and you should be selling this stuff instead of copiers." He just loved it all, and he got me into it. "I've been doing jazzercise for 40 years, Alice said. I tell you this because this is where Barney's story turns. Because his super healthy lifestyle conflicts with what happened to him on November 23rd, 1987. That day, he called Alice from LaGuardia Airport at around 3 p.m., saying his flight was delayed by an hour, but that he'd still be home in time for dinner. No problem. Alice told me in an interview for this story. I remember this because he said he was bringing home tofu from a new health store in New York, and I wasn't super happy about it. I had no idea what to do with it. So the Northwest Airline flight is late, but less than an hour. No big deal. And soon he's back in Detroit, and then he's home in Dearborn, and they have dinner, and by bedtime, Alice starts to notice something. Barney said he felt heavy. Alice said, "I assumed he was just tired. It had been a long day. He didn't have a stomach ache or anything. He just kept repeating that he felt heavy. That's the word he used." Barney took some aspirin, and they went to bed. They had plans to work out together in the morning. It was the routine. He'd do Bowflex, and she'd do jazzercise. They were both looking forward to it. Then, at about 1 a.m., Alice noticed the bathroom light was on, and that the spot next to her in bed was empty. Strange. She was awake, but not really, like drifting in and out of sleep. She thought Barney probably just had to use the bathroom. No big deal. But then an hour later, at 2 a.m., according to the nightstand digital clocks they both had, Barney's side of the bed was still empty. And that bathroom light was still on, shining in that thin, glowing line under the door. Alice said she called out to him from bed. No answer. She went to the door and tried his name again. No answer. She reached for the handle and nudged the door open, and it just sort of stuck, like it thudded against something. So Alice pushed the door open, really getting her shoulder into it, and what was pushing on the other side, making it difficult to enter the bathroom, was her husband, Barnie. He was sprawled out on the bathroom floor, naked, the door thudding against his slim, muscly chest. He was, clearly, dead. Alice said she called 911 immediately, and the arriving ambulance soon turned into a county morgue van. It's important to note exactly what the responding EMTs and the lone police officer sent that early morning made clear in their reports. There was no foul play, not even a whisper of it. No break-ins, no fights, no blood or signs of a struggle at all, no former lovers or stalkers or robbers or anyone who could have done them harm. So, it was ruled a health event in the middle of the night. Happens all the time. Maybe it was stress, a heart attack, a stroke, just a man dying too soon at home in the middle of the night. At the funeral 3 days later, people whispered that Barney simply, quote, overdid it with the health stuff. Many people believed at the time that people had internal batteries you could simply use up too soon with too much exercise, and they wondered if Barney's battery had simply gone dry. Too much exercise, too much health, it wore him out. What wouldn't be discovered for nearly 10 years was that Barney's battery had not simply run dry. Not at all. But the truly wild thing about Barney's case and the cases of so many other men is how, ultimately, the truth was revealed. It wasn't an investigation or DNA or a family member fighting against the system for justice. Remember, Barney's death was ruled a health event. There was no justice to seek or killer to look for. He had a heart attack. It was tragic, but nothing to do about it. I first learned about this case from Sheriff Morgan Press, who crime-adjacent listeners know was involved in the case of the Michigan Night Stalker, which is the subject of Season 8 of the show. During my time in Michigan with Sheriff Press, we got to talking, and she told me that her brother, Sam Press, was an FBI profiler back when it was called the Behavioral Science Unit, and it was Sam, Special Agent Press, who actually solved this case, who was, quite honestly, the first person to realize there even was a case. Because none of the men involved in this story even knew about each other. The only connection they had was that they had died suddenly, out of the blue, after coming home from trips to report that they felt heavy. Just like the second known victim in this case, a man named Alexander Alex Cascarino, a 34-year-old financial analyst from Palo Alto, California. Alex was a numbers guy for the emerging field of private equity companies in the 80s and 90s, and from all accounts, he was very, very good at his job. Everything to him was a spreadsheet. Which companies were struggling but had potential, which were struggling and were just going to fizzle out. It was Alex's job to advise private equity firms which companies to buy or merge or not. And for this, he was paid very, very well. He and his wife, Alicia, lived in Tony Menlo Park, where they had met on a local road cycling club. Alex applied the same spreadsheets and numbers games to their cycling workouts, and together, Alicia and Alex had great fun seeing who could do more miles that week, or who had more difficult workouts, thanks to their little heart monitor gadgets they each wore. Alicia said in an interview, "You have to remember, this was the time of Greg LeMond, the cycling champ. Our bike club was super into it, and so were we. That's how we met and how we bonded." Alicia worked for Hewlett-Packard, also as a numbers whiz. They both traveled a lot for meetings and such, and even with that they competed, seeing who could rack up the most sky miles and points program perks type stuff. Alicia smiled at this memory. "We were nerds," she said. "No doubt. Nerds to the core." And then came the trip to New York. It was just a routine run-of-the-mill trip. Alex went back and forth from San Francisco Airport to LaGuardia a few times a month for meetings, and this was just another routine meeting to talk with the company board about their finances and the possibility of a merger. Alicia said Alex returned to San Francisco on September 16, 1988. He had flown first class on United Airlines, and when he got home to Menlo Park, he drove his Porsche from the airport to their small town about 20 miles or so south. And she said he seemed fine, if a little tired. Alex also said, according to Alicia, that he felt heavy. It was a weird term, which is why she remembered it. She recalled that his chest felt weird and his neck ached, and honestly, that was it. They didn't really think much of it. He had just had a time change there and back to New York, a long flight, lots of work. He was just tired and wanted to go to bed because they planned to go on a long bike ride through the rolling hills of Woodside, another fancy town on the edges of Silicon Valley. So they go to bed, dreaming of beating each other on the road the next morning, and when Alicia wakes up, she finds it strange that Alex is still asleep, right next to her. He's usually up first, making coffee, checking the news, looking at his spreadsheets. She nudged him with an elbow and said something about their bike ride. But Alex didn't budge. She nudged him again, and again. Nothing. She propped herself up on her elbows and poked him, but in her interview, even years later, she paused, catching herself. She said, "I could just tell, looking at him, that he was gone." Indeed, the ambulance came and then one cop, which is common practice when someone dies suddenly outside of medical care. But just like the case of Barney Jones a few months earlier in a country away, the death of Alex Cascarino aroused no suspicion. There was no struggle, no marital strife, no burglars, no violence of any kind. Or I guess that's not entirely true. Although no official autopsy was requested, Alicia and the ambulance medics and the cops all thought Alex had suffered a sudden heart attack in his sleep brought on by stress or genetics or even, yes, too much exercise. The medical examiner in the morgue did note on her forms that there was a weird bruise on Alex's right elbow, just a shade of a bruise, and the tiniest hint of swelling there. And that's it. Just another sudden death, an entire country apart from another one. And then there was a third. Lindsay Buttersfield III arrived home in Mobile, Alabama on August 13, 1990, after a short weekend guy's trip to Las Vegas. How do I say this? Because Lindsay Buttersfield III sounds like a super fancy name with a blue blood pedigree and family money, but Lindsay, known as Truck to his friends for unknown reasons, was not fancy. He was, honestly, sort of a douchebag by most accounts, not the light up every room type of guy you hear about in true crime. He reminded me in a way of Bobby Briggs, the third victim of the rest stop killer back from season 7. No one liked these guys, and they didn't mind saying it. Truck married 3 times and cheated on each wife. None of his former wives or girlfriends had anything nice to say about him. It turns out that, yes, he did actually have family money, but really didn't do anything with it besides drinking and fornicating and buying new trucks. In fact, he wanted to get home early that day. The rest of his boys' crew was supposed to stay a few extra days for a party with some strippers in Vegas, but Truck had a hot date with a woman named Tanya Smith. So Lindsay, or Truck, gets home on the night of the 13th in a quiet, nice part of town near downtown Mobile, and the next day goes by and no one hears from him. But no one really expected to hear from him. Truck had enough money to not really have a job unless he wanted to, and no kids or family to check in on. But on the 14th, he never shows up to his date with Tanya Smith, the whole reason he left Vegas early. Later, Smith was interviewed by the cops because word had gotten around that they were supposed to go on a date. Her report says, quote, "I was pretty pissed, but not enough to go over and kill him. Are you kidding me? I just thought, his loss." So Truck misses his date with Tanya on the 14th, and she doesn't report it. And this makes sense. She doesn't really know him. It was literally their first date, and he just doesn't show, and she just goes home, annoyed. No big deal. But a few days go by. No one hears from Truck. But again, no one is supposed to. No one really likes him. What few friends he has are still in Vegas or arriving home. No job, no kids, no dates or other dates. Nothing. Finally, on the 17th, this is August 17th, 1990, Dale Turner, one of his actual friends and the reason they all went to Vegas in the first place, goes over to Truck's house. Dale had been calling for several days, wanting to tell him about the stripper party and ask about his date with Tanya. But he's gotten no answer, so he goes over to Truck's house. He knocks. No answer. Lindsay's truck, or Truck's truck, is in the driveway, but there seems to be no sign of life. And Dale just leaves. I mean, Truck is 32. He's single, no responsibilities, sort of a cad who went by his own rules. It wasn't out of the question he'd just go off on a trip and not answer, or maybe was super hungover, whatever. But a few more days go by, and still, no one hears from him. Dale goes over to his house again. The truck is still in the driveway, in the same place. No one answers the door. Dale told police, "I thought about calling the cops, but for what? My buddy just wasn't responding." So Dale leaves again. But that night, this is the 20th now, a week after he misses his date, and Dale is out at Toppy's bar in downtown Mobile with his friends. They're all just having fun and asking each other if anyone had seen Truck. No one had. But again, I can't stress this enough. Truck was known for just doing his own thing, and no one except Dale really thought it was odd or thought anything of it at all. But then, Dale spots Tanya at the bar, Toppy's. She's with another guy, not Truck. Dale approaches, and Tanya fills him in. Truck never showed. He never called. She hasn't heard from him. According to court records, Dale, who has since died, told police that was the final straw. I just knew something was up. So he and his friends and even Tanya and Tanya's new date all go on over to Truck's house that night, and they, bust in, like literally bust in through the front door. And there, in the foyer, they find their friend, Truck. He's in the same clothes he wore from the Vegas trip a week ago. In fact, his suitcase is right beside him. It appears as if Truck entered his house, set his keys on a table, pushed his suitcase into the living room, and just died. But not, it appeared, of a heart attack or any medical event or health reason, because there was blood everywhere. On Truck, on the walls, on the suitcase, on the little foyer table, pooling on the floor. At first, his friends all thought Truck must have been followed home and robbed and murdered for his money. People in town knew he didn't have to work if he didn't really want to. He wasn't crazy rich, but he had means, as he said, which I guess is a total rich person thing to say. Police raced to the scene and questioned everyone, and were really going to town on this until the autopsy came back, and the final story emerged. Truck did, in fact, die suddenly, but not of murder. It turns out, Truck really did have a heart attack. He fell over, hit his head on the table on the way down, and died of natural causes, even if he suffered a bloody knock to the head in the process and spent some amount of time scrambling for help, spreading blood all over the place. The medical report said there were no signs of violence or anything other than the head wound from the table, and a small, barely noticeable red and swollen mark on his left elbow. Maybe he knocked it on the table, investigators thought. Who knows? So now we have 3 men, 2 healthy and 1 not really, but they're all in different parts of the country and no connections between them except maybe, if you're being really picky, they had these little swollen bits on the elbow. But who's looking for this? It's just 3 guys in 3 wildly different jurisdictions dropping dead suddenly from natural causes. I cannot stress this enough. No one knew what was really happening at the time, which is why this probably sounds so random and disconnected at this point. Until 1991. Until the case of Jonathan Frazier cracked the window ever so slightly in a way that would eventually allow Special Agent Sam Press to see everything and put all these random pieces together in a story that makes sense with a villain you'll never believe. So it's April 27, 1991. Jonathan Frazier arrives home in San Francisco from a long trip to Miami. He has dinner, goes to bed with his husband, also Jonathan, but goes by Johnny, and drops dead in the middle of welcome home sex. I'm not trying to be voyeuristic or anything, but that's just what happened. That's what Johnny told the police and the medical examiners. One minute they're having a great time reconnecting, and the next, dead. Sad. Horrible. But it happens. Or does it? I actually looked this up to see if it's a Hollywood trope type of thing. You're getting hot and heavy, there's too much strain, sudden clutching of the chest. You've seen this scene before. But, according to Cedars-Sinai, the actual cases of people, it's usually men but not always, having heart attacks during or immediately after sex is less than 1% of heart attack victims. Another study puts it at 0.2%, so way less. Which is all to say, there's a gap between what we see socially, culturally on TV and what happens in real life, according to medical examiners. In other words, it's a pretty rare way to go, and this would become important to this case. Here's what happened. So, Jonathan Fraser and his husband, Johnny, from here on out to avoid confusion, were not legally married, but they weren't going to let that stop them. They called themselves husband and husband, even if the state wouldn't officially recognize same-sex marriages for another 20 years or so. So, it's the 90s, and Jonathan's good friend, Albert, Al, had died in Miami, and Jonathan wanted to attend the funeral. Johnny objected. I guess there was bad blood or a past affair or relationship. Johnny declined to comment on it in detail, other than to say Albert was Jonathan's friend, and that was that. Sort of. Johnny told me, I think, if I'm being really honest, I don't like to talk about it because if I had gone like Jonathan had wanted me to, what happened next would never have happened. So Jonathan, who worked in sales at Macy's downtown, goes to Miami alone, attends the funeral, comes home. The couple have a big fight and they make up, and then they really, really make up, and during this making up, Jonathan dies. Just quickly. Heart attack. He had briefly complained about being tired and worn out, and yes, heavy. But then he said he was fine, and then really fine, and then not. Johnny recalled, I'll never forget the ambulance driver. You have to remember, San Francisco is seen as this super liberal, wokey, yuppie place, but even back then, especially back then, during the height of the AIDS crisis, there was a lot of hate. A lot. The cops hated us. Dan White. People sided with him. It was horrible. And they're leading my husband out of the house on a stretcher, and this ambulance driver mumbles, fucking gay AIDS or some shit. And I just wanted to scream. It just pissed me off so much. Even the first two cops asked about AIDS and whether Jonathan had it, and Johnny said, I'm just thinking that's all they see us as, just these diseased gays. I was infuriated. I think that's why I did it. Not for any real reason, if I'm being honest, other than just to hell with them all. I mention all these legal issues in this cultural moment because back then, in 1991, Johnny didn't have legal authority. He had to convince Jonathan's mom, Millie, to push for an autopsy to figure out why Jonathan died. And she did. And the results? It was a heart attack, just as suspected. But not from plaque buildup or poor health or too vigorous sex. Remember, that's super rare, and the medical examiner knew this and was on high alert. Which is why the toxicology report turned up red flags. It was odd. Like, incredibly odd. Something no one in San Francisco or Miami would run into. It was a chemical the medical examiner had quite literally never seen before, and in fact, she thought it was so strange that the findings had to be wrong. And so she shipped the results off to the forensics lab at the FBI in Virginia because she didn't know what to make of it. Somehow, in some way, Jonathan Fraser had come into contact with a drug called Waban, or arrow poison in French. You might have heard of South American indigenous tribes using the poison from tree frogs to make poison hunting darts. It affects the nerves, paralyzes you. This was the same chemical compound used to kill Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny in prison, according to Sky News. It's powerful, like 200 times more powerful than morphine. According to the National Library of Medicine, Waban is similar, but it doesn't come from tree frogs. It comes from a plant, or tree, in parts of Africa. Locally, in Ethiopia, it's known as Mers inchet, although it's technically classified as, forgive this pronunciation, Ocontera skimperi, after the German botanist who, quote-unquote, discovered it. If you boil down the leaves and branches of this tree and get the sticky leftover goop that comes from the boil, you can apply this to your darts and hunt your prey. Here's the key. Unlike the frog poison, it doesn't affect your nerves. It affects your heart. For some people, it could provide a heavy sensation, a pain in the chest, in the neck, fatigue, and in the right doses, a heart attack. But it can't be ingested. It has to be injected, like with a dart. The stomach lining is too thick to cause harm, but in the bloodstream, Waban can be quite deadly. It's been used to hunt animals, and even in warfare, it's not great. So learning all this, back in San Francisco, Johnny, the medical examiner, and now even the FBI forensics people, they're all stumped. Like, how on earth did Jonathan come into contact with this drug? And how did it get in his system? And how did he not notice? This is not something you inject into yourself, not even in hard-partying 1990s Miami. Johnny said, "I think about our conversations all the time." When he returned that night, I was giving him grief about being sad over an old lover. Honestly, I was being a real shit about it, and he was telling me about the nice flight he had, and how the stewardess gave him an extra bowl of ice cream, and how the nice lady next to him showed him the infinity scarf she was knitting for a friend. That was Jonathan. He had a real gift for gab. People liked him. But now, the FBI had gotten involved thanks to the medical examiner. This was a possible poisoning. The FBI ended up questioning the stewardess who served Jonathan. In fact, the records show the questioning got quite rough. Did she put anything in his food? Did she stab him with anything? Did she see anything? No. It was just a regular flight. Long, but fine. Nothing happened. No drunks, no disturbances. The only thing this flight attendant remembered was that at one point, Jonathan went to the bathroom, clutching his arm like he was sore. And this also matched the medical examiner's report, because they didn't just find evidence of a heart attack and poison, but also a possible injection point on his elbow. But when he got home that night, Jonathan never even mentioned it. He was fine. Like Johnny said, they fought, made up, made love, and Jonathan suddenly dies. So, strangely, even though investigators suddenly had all this information available to them, the fact that Jonathan had tree dart poison in his system and died from it, his death was ruled accidental. An accidental overdose or poisoning, they couldn't be sure. They didn't classify it as a homicide or do much else with it because it seemed like such a freak occurrence. Poison from some Ethiopian tree. Perhaps he, in some way, somehow bumped into something. The FBI interviewed quite literally everyone at Albert's funeral in Miami, the reason Jonathan was there, and no one saw or heard or had anything negative to say at all. It was all just so strange. And just like that, the case of Jonathan Frazier was closed. It wasn't a homicide, it was accidental, a freakish occurrence like the sudden deaths of Barnie and Alex and Truck. Just 4 dudes who didn't know each other dying of heart attacks. What's even to look for? Until a random offhand comment changed everything. You're going to want to hear this. So after Jonathan's death in 1991, fast forward 4 more years to August 13th, 1995. Go back to Mobile, Alabama, in Lindsay Buttersfield III, Truck. Remember, this is the guy who returns from Vegas, has a heart attack, hits his head on a table, that guy. But now go back in 1995 to the very same block Truck lived on, Birch Drive in Mobile. This is August 1995, 5 years after Truck's bloody heart attack. And on this block, Birch Drive, there was a kidnapping just a few houses down from Truck's former house. A small boy was taken off his bicycle by a stranger and never seen again. This is how FBI Special Agent Sam Press gets involved in this case. Press, remember, was the FBI profiler who advised police on cases like this, these kidnappings, and he was called into Mobile to help create a profile of the abductor so they could find this missing boy. Sam Press, it turns out, worked in consultation that week in Mobile with the same FBI forensics investigator who tested Jonathan Frazier's blood in San Francisco 4 years ago, 1991, and originally discovered Waban, the tree dart poison. This becomes important. So it's late at night in Mobile. It's been another long day and a series of long days trying to find this missing boy. And Sam Press, the profiler, and this forensics guy, Art Blanche, are chatting outside their motel room by the pool late at night, drinking beers, relaxing, trying just to rest for the first time in a few days. Sam Press recalled that they're talking about weird cases and kidnappings and murder and blood work and forensics, and when they finally will get to go back to Virginia, their home, where they both live near the FBI. And this forensics guy, Art, says something like, "Yeah, can't wait to get back to easy cases like tree dart poisoning." And Sam Press stops in his tracks. In an interview, he told me, "It felt like a movie scene. I was literally about to take a swig of beer, and I stopped. I said, 'What did you say?'" Art filled him in on Jonathan Frazier's case and the tree dart poisoning and how weird it was and how he had never seen a case like that before or since. It was strange. But FBI profiler Press is stunned because he had, in fact, seen another case just like it. The case of Bernard Barney Jones, the 53-year-old Xerox salesman from Dearborn, Michigan. It turns out, in that case, Barney's mother, Barbara, who has since died, pushed and pushed for an autopsy. It didn't make sense, she said. Barney was too healthy to just suddenly die of a heart attack. Alice, his wife, eventually agreed, and they had a private autopsy performed. Sure enough, heart attack, just as they thought. But there was a weird glitch in the toxicology screen, something that clearly had to be an error. In the blood work, they had discovered a weird toxin from Ethiopia, a plant-derived poison called waban, which was odd, to say the least. So odd, in fact, that they thought it was an error, like the samples had been switched or something. So the medical examiner sends it off to the FBI lab in Virginia to double-check, and sure enough, it was indeed waban. But just like Jonathan's case, it was considered an accidental overdose or accidental poisoning or perhaps a switch sample, not homicide, and it was then forgotten about. The thing is, and this is just sheer dumb luck, Sam Press wasn't investigating Barney's case. No one was. Press just happened to be in the right place at the right time. He just happened to be chatting with another forensic tech, not Art, in the FBI lab when the results came back on Barney. The tech said, "Strange, tree poison," and Sam shrugged, like, "Oh yeah, that's weird." That was that. He didn't think much of it. He was just an overheard result, and Sam returned to his own work. At the time, he was working on the Zodiac case and new DNA testing that was coming into vogue, and he just forgot about the tree poison. Everyone did. Even Art Blanche, the forensics guy who would work with Sam Press in Mobile and who worked in the forensics lab in Virginia, he didn't know about this weird toxicology result either, not even years later when he worked on Jonathan Frazier's blood work. This is one of those weird, tragic moments when investigations and bureaucracies and communication all team up to go sideways. Because if they had flagged this rare poison at the time and matched these samples together, Barney's and then years later Jonathan's, they might have put things together sooner. But they didn't. People are people. We make mistakes or just don't know about these connections because we just literally don't know about them. I just find it all so fascinating how everything came together after this point. It wasn't an investigation or lab work or protocols or shared databases that connected these cases. It was an overheard result in Virginia and then one offhand comment by the pool in Mobile, Alabama on another case altogether. Art told Sam about his case, about Jonathan and the rare poison. Sam told Art what he remembered about a man named Barney and the same rare poison. And Sam and Art were both suddenly curious. When they got back from Mobile, the kidnapped boy was never found, they both looked into any links between Barney's case and Jonathan's, and what they found began to connect all the dots. On the surface, profiler Sam Press saw two vastly different men, Jonathan and Barney, each living a country apart, but each back from a recent trip and each dead of a seeming heart attack within hours. But each man also had this rare poison in their bloodstream somehow. Different airlines, Different flights, different cities, different lives altogether. But, and this was curious, the only thing linking them together was the exact same stewardess on each flight. Leanne Patterson, age 32, also weirdly enough, originally from Mobile, Alabama. This stood out immediately. Leanne Patterson had even commented on Jonathan's arm. She remembered it, how he went to the bathroom during the flight, and she said he noticed it. Johnny, the husband, recalled that Jonathan said this stewardess had even given him extra ice cream. He remembered that detail. Was that it? Was this anything? Remember, these cases were still classified as accidents, not homicides. Still, something was bothering Agent Sam Press. He said it was like an itch, like I knew there was something more and just couldn't place it. He wound up interviewing Leanne Patterson, but not before going over every single inch of her life beforehand. And what he found was curious. A solid reputation, a mother of two now, although single back then. She still worked as a stewardess, I think flight attendants they call them now, and has no criminal history whatsoever. Not a blemish, no debts, no arrest, no travel to Ethiopia or any part of Africa. Things were not looking great as far as suspects went. In their interview, Sam Pressey started casually and then, with nothing, just really went to town on her. He figured this was, in the end, a total waste of time and wanted to see if maybe she'd crack, his only real chance to get anything out of her, if there was anything. So during this interview, he's ramping up the pressure and accusations and just nothing. Sam Press said he interviewed a lot of bad people over the years. Serial killers, child molesters, kidnappers, Epstein list celebrities and professors and politicians, and he knew gross, sneaky, slimy people when he saw them. But Leanne was not that. She was clean. She basically repeated what she told him from the beginning. She saw Jonathan had really taken a liking to his seatmate, an elderly woman knitting a shawl or scarf or something, and she just thought it was sweet that he was humoring her so much. She knew elderly passengers could gab, and so she gave him some extra ice cream. That was it. She swears. Nothing happened. She didn't do anything. Leanne Patterson was let go, with apologies, and Press was left with nothing more than his flight logs and hunches and weird feelings. And that's when he saw it. In the flight log, the seatmate, the elderly scarf knitter. On his flight from Miami, Jonathan was seated in seat 3B, right next to 3A, which was occupied by a woman named Velma P. Harris from New York, a widower who liked to travel. This must be the person Patterson was talking about, the elderly lady that Jonathan was keeping company on this flight. The name looked familiar somehow, like that itch in the back of Sam Press's brain. He had seen this name before. Press turned to Barney's flight log. Again, there was Patterson, as expected, on the flight crew list. Press said he practically had a heart attack when he saw it. Sitting right next to Barney in first class was none other than Velma P. Harris. That couldn't be a coincidence, right? Both of these guys are on flights. Both are poisoned by some Ethiopian plant toxin. Both get home and die of totally out-of-the-blue heart attacks. And both men, in their final hours, were seated directly next to the same person. Press said in that moment, while staring at the flight logs, he almost instinctively flinched. He said, "Have you ever touched your seatmate, like with your elbow or arm, and you jump a little bit and move away?" He said, "Think about it. It was perfect access. In what other circumstances would your elbow be susceptible to stabbing? Sitting close to someone on an airplane had to be number one." Press said his momentary excitement gave way to bewilderment, however. At the time of Barney Jones' death in 1987, Velma P. Harris would have been exactly 83 years old. In 1991, when Jonathan died, she would have been 87. By 1995, when Press and Art were chatting by the pool in Mobile, Alabama, and they made this connection with an offhand comment, Harris would have been 91. Was she even still alive? Was any of this even possible? Is that really the age of a working serial killer? Maybe, he thought, the two men had just died of strange accidental circumstances after all. But then another thought hit him. Serial killers and FBI profiling, his life's work. He knew there was a rise in serial murder beginning in the 60s and continuing into the 80s and 90s, and he knew that it was something like 9-to-1 men when it comes to killers. But before the 1900s, he knew that serial killing used to have an even gender divide, like 50-50. And the weapon of choice for women serial killers? Poison. In our interview, Press said he immediately ripped into Harris's travel history. This was before 9/11 and digital dragnets, but he was still able to piece together some records. And he discovered that she was on a flight from Las Vegas to Mobile, Alabama on August 13th, 1990, seated in 4C next to a person named, wait for it, Lindsay Buttersfield III in 4D. Press looked into this Buttersfield guy and learned not only his nickname, Truck, but that he had died that very day, the day of the flight, of a heart attack. After that, Press really went to town on Harris's travel records and all her seatmates, investigating what, if anything, happened to each one. What he found stunned him. Man after man, flight after flight, Press saw that 12 men in total, out of about 40 trips around the country from 1987 to 1995, had died of a heart attack just hours after getting home from the airport, just hours after saying goodbye to their seatmate, Velma P. Harris. Press immediately checked their Social Security records and saw that Harris was in fact very much alive, living in New York City at a small apartment on the Upper West Side, near the Natural History Museum, where she worked, for a few years at least in the 1970s, as a botanist. Press booked a flight to New York. He had to talk to her. But first, he dug into her background and discovered she was not only a botanist, but a renowned one. Well, becoming a renowned one. It turns out her husband, Peter Harris, was a renowned botanist who did all sorts of major research on medicinal plants and their potential life-saving abilities, especially plants native to parts of Africa. He was awarded, acclaimed, lots of recognition, while Velma, also a botanist from UC Berkeley, where they met, worked at the Natural History Museum on helping to write up placards. Slightly less renowned work, I guess. But when Peter died, and all his papers were donated back to Berkeley, it was quickly discovered that his wife, Velma, did the majority of the work, the research, and the discoveries. Is that it? Press wondered. Was she just pissed? Velma P. Harris had no criminal history, no debts, no major enemies, no signs at all of any type of violent past or history. She spent her time walking every day in Central Park and visiting the museum and traveling when she could. But when Press knocked on her apartment door, announcing himself as the FBI, Velma said something Press will never forget. She said, "I've been waiting for you." Which, weird, right? It gets weirder. Much weirder. Press said she invited him in, this sweet little old lady with knitting needles and spools of yarn on her yellow velvet recliner, and plants seemingly everywhere, and she offered him a seat and a cup of tea. Herbal, her own blend. And Press said the first thing he remembered thinking was, absolutely, in no uncertain terms, will you touch that tea. Not even the cup. Do not be polite about it. In fact, Press said, and I quote for our interview here, I didn't even know where or whether I should sit, or what I should do with my arms, because once inside, I was suddenly surrounded by plants everywhere, and I wasn't sure which ones I could touch or not. I've been in the field for 30 years at this point, and suddenly, standing in that cramped apartment, I was more scared than I've ever been in my entire life. I wish I had worn a hazmat suit. So Velma Harris sits down in her recliner with her own tea, while Press is still standing very awkwardly in the middle of the room, and she just begins to talk, unprompted. She asks, "How did you find me? Was it the elbows?" Press said no, it was the toxicology screens. He said Harris laughed, or sort of smirked. "I bet you thought it was just an error for the longest time, right?" Press nodded. "Yeah," Harris said, "it's a rare poison." Then she pointed by one of her windows. It was a nice enough looking plant, like a ficus, but with clusters of white flowers and blueberry looking fruit. "That's what you're looking for," she said, drinking her tea, casually. "Merzinchet, my baby." Press couldn't help it, he recalled. He wanted to know, right away, the question that was plaguing him. Why? Leanne Patterson, the flight attendant, recalled a nice little old lady who only wanted some company on the flight. Jonathan recalled to Johnny on his final night about the sweet lady seated next to him from Miami. Alice said later she did indeed recall Barney talking about this sweet seatmate as well, and her scarf or shawl or something like that. But to Press's surprise, Velma P. Harris was not some kind, gray-haired grandmother knitting presents for her children or grandchildren. She was a whip-smart, fed-up, cagey old woman who was, in the end, simply sick to death of these men. While Leanne Patterson said it appeared as if Jonathan was humoring Harris, keeping her company during the flight, Harris told Press straight up that the opposite was true. She said that man would just not shut up about everything. He went on and on and on, and I'm not even sure what about. I tried to tune him out, but he just wouldn't stop, and so I poked him. I've poked a lot of men, if I'm being honest, and you know what? The world's a better place for it. Press remembers this. He could hardly believe it. Not only were there indeed links between these cases, they were all indeed homicides after all. And not only did he have a suspect, he had a confession. Just like that. Still standing awkwardly in the living room, still sort of fearful to move. Velma P. Harris confessed to poking no less than 12 men over the years for all sorts of, let's be clear, minor but perhaps deeply gendered annoyances. Endless talking, middle armrest taking, leg spreading, cutting in line, one time stealing someone else's bread right off their plate and saying, "You're not going to eat that, are you, sweet little thing?" Harris said, "I was glad to poke that guy most of all." To Harris, these were not minor inconveniences or grievances. She'd had enough. She sort of grumbled about these social and gendered infractions for years, and they got worse the older she got and the more invisible she became in the eyes of society, to men in particular. A sweet old lady. Don't mind her. Just spread your legs all over her. Take her food. Bore her to tears. At some point, she lost it. So she began bringing a vial of her tree dart poison along with her knitting needles, and at some point, if she got annoyed enough, she simply reached over and gave each of these men a little poke on the elbow, like, "Oh, whoopsie, I'm sorry." If these men used her age and gender to walk all over her, she used it to get away with murder. Who suspects a sweet little old lady of malice, let alone a years-long campaign of serial murder? But Velma P. Harris knew Peter Harris's work better than anyone, and she knew just the right formulations and additives to make the plant poison work over the next 12 hours instead of the usual 1 to 2. And she knew these men would simply return home and die a quiet, everyday death that looked like heart attacks. And she knew if anyone discovered the poison, they'd think it was an error. And she knew, thanks to her age and gender, that she'd simply slip through the cracks with the cloak of invisibility afforded to or forced upon the elderly. She knew no one would suspect her. And she was right. In the living room, Press was still standing in the middle, afraid to move, said he realized he was looking at one of the nation's worst serial killers. No remorse, no guilt, no qualms whatsoever. Just killed men at random for minor annoyances. For her part, Velma kept drinking her tea and said to Press that maybe, just maybe, all these men would still be alive if they didn't behave like such, quote, assholes. Maybe, she said, they should keep their arms and legs to themselves and not touch everyone or talk so damn much. Press said he quickly regained his senses and read Velma Harris her Miranda rights and placed her under arrest for the murders she had confessed to in that room and perhaps others they simply didn't know about yet. He recalled being almost apologetic, like, "I'm sorry, kind old lady, but you're going to have to come with me. You're under arrest for murder, serial murder." But Velma P. Harris had other plans that day. She drained her tea, lifting the glass to consume every last drop, put the cup down and said, "In fact, I won't be going with you, Agent Press, because I'm feeling, in this moment, suddenly quite heavy." Then she paused and winked and said, "I bet they said that, didn't they?" Press said she called an ambulance, but Harris was dead within a half hour of a heart attack induced by the very tree poisons she had researched and turned into weapons. In the end, Press said Harris was ultimately responsible for 12 murders, but possibly up to 30 more. Some bodies were never autopsied and are now awaiting still exhumation, while others were cremated, so it's possible we will just never know. I don't know about you, but I've wondered, while driving, whether the death penalty is okay for people who don't use turn signals, even though I've forgotten to use my own turn signals just blocks after having these thoughts. How about people who listen to videos on speakerphone, or hold phone calls on speakerphone, or all those guys who pace at airports while talking on speakerphones? Not cool, my dudes. I'm not sure if you have your own pet peeves. It's all fun and games to think they deserve something more than social shame and stigma. But death? To Velma P. Harris, who became known as the cross-country widowmaker, these men and men just like them had crossed an inviolate line. And I'm reminded, in the end, if nothing else, to keep my hands and arms and legs to myself. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, Austin. This has been great. Nikki and I will be in the merch line all night, so please stop by to chat. We will see you in Memphis next week with another case you simply will not believe. Until next time, I'm Chase Patrick, and this is Crime Adjacent.